This lecture is on Unit 3A, which is the uses and abuses of percents. So last time we talked about things like mortality rate and crime rate often being used as cases per 100,000. Well, percent is really kind of the same thing, except for instead of 100,000, it's out of 100. So it means percent means divided by 100. You've had tests in the past where you got a percentage score. Probably not 100 points. So you've done homework or quizzes or tests or things like that, and you'll get, maybe 20 points on the question, but you'll get a percentage score. And that means that they took the relative, what it was of, maybe 19 out of 20, and then made a percent out of it, which would be 95%. That way you can kind of compare how you do between assignments. So if I gave you 35%, would express that as a reduced fraction and as a decimal. Well, to go from a percent to a decimal, all we do is move the decimal two places to the left. So that becomes 0.35. And if you're missing a number, say at 5%, then make sure you put a 0 there. So it would be 0.05. Because if you move it and you wrote down 0.5, that's 50%, not 5%. So if you have a single digit, make sure to put a 0 when you move the decimal. All right, if I want it as a reduced fraction, so percent once again means out of 100, so 35 out of 100. Both of those are divisible by 5. So 5 goes into 35 7 times. Goes into 120 times, so 7 over 100. All right, compare the following numbers. A is 210, B is 520. I want the ratio from A to B. So that would be 210 divided by 520. We're going to divide both by 10 or just drop the zeros, and we get 21 over 52. If I want the ratio of B to A, that's 520 divided by 210, or 52 divided by 21. Notice, while the numbers are the same, it does matter which one is being divided by the other, because 21 divided by 52 is a very different number than 52 divided by 21. For part C, A is what percent of B? So we are going to take 21 divided by 52 and times it by 100. When you are doing these, make sure that if it is a percent, you do put a percent. So this would be 40.38%. That is very different than 40.38. Those are two different numbers. Now in this case, because it does have percent after the blank, you could get away with it. But if it's just a simple question, make sure you do put the percentage on it. All right. From the Australian Bureau of Statistics, they did a study and they showed that 3 out of 4 Australians make up 75% of the population. That was a good use of government resources out there. All right, one of the places you'll see percentages a lot in is in opinion surveys, polls, things like that. So this opinion poll finds that 64% of people surveyed said the president's doing a good job. If there's 1,069 people surveyed, how many people said the president's doing a good job? So what we're going to do is we're going to take 64. We are going to convert it to a decimal. So we're going to move it 2 decimal places to the left. Take 0.64 times it by 1,069, and we get 684.16. Since I've never met anybody who volunteers to be 0.16 of a person, we are going to round that to 684. So be careful when you do these. Once again, if you're dealing with people or something like that, and it does happen to come out as a decimal, that you can round. It's also a sign, though, if numbers come out, if you will, too perfect, there's a pretty good chance it's probably faked. So in this case, it wasn't exactly 64. They rounded the 64 to get the number, which is why the number comes on the end. But once again, if someone was to come to me with these perfect percentages and these exact numbers, I'm going to be pretty suspicious. Because things in the real world don't come out as nice, round, perfect numbers. So once again, make sure you're careful. So here was a article: 9% of Canadians believe the Mayan calendar, which some say ends in 2012, marks the end of the world. Obviously, it didn't, although 2020 is giving it a pretty good run for its money. But if you look at the headline, it said almost 10% of Canadians. Well, 9% is almost 10%. I'll give it to them on that. But as you come a little bit further in the article, it says 1 in 7 think the end of the world is coming. If I take 1 divided by 7 and times it by 100, I am going to get 14.3%. That is not 9%, and it is definitely almost not 10%. So be careful when reading things. I don't know if this was intentional or if it was just a mistake, but either way, it doesn't quite add up. All right, using percentages to describe change. Percentages can be used to describe a change in time, quantity, or how things change. Okay, got to be a little bit careful when we're doing these. For example, if we're dealing with, say, COVID cases, since obviously that's going to be in the news for a while, if I go from 1 case to 4 cases, you could make the argument that that is a 300% increase in cases. I went from 1 to 4, I had 3 new cases. And so if you wanted to write a headline, you could say local cases increased by 300%, and that would definitely get people's attention. But we did kind of just go from 1 to 4, really not that big a deal if you're talking about a population of, say, 2 million. Now, if you have a population of 10, that's probably a much bigger deal. Okay. And then the same thing, if you're going from, say, 1 million cases to 1.1 million cases, well, that's 100,000 cases now, but it's only 10% increase. So you kind of need both numbers to get an accurate picture. Okay. So if you're looking at, data, an article or something like that, and they only give you one of these, go ahead and go find the other one, because there's probably something else going on that they don't want to relate. It's one of those cases where technically they are telling the truth, but they're not exactly giving an accurate picture. So always make sure you kind of look at both before making a judgment call. So the first thing is just the absolute change. The absolute change is the new value minus the reference value. Or if you want to think about it, new minus old. That's just a straight number. It's going to be in whatever units the original values are in. A relative change is the new value minus the reference value divided by the reference value. Okay. And it is a percent, so we are going to times it by 100. So, for example, okay, I'm going to move this just a little bit so we get the shade out. Sorry, sun's moving. Okay. Says, during a 6-month period, Xerox stock doubled in price from $7 to $14. What were the absolute and relative changes in the stock prices? So the new value is 14, the old value is 7. So to find the absolute change, we're going to take 14 minus 7 and get $7. Okay. All right. For the relative change, we're going to take 14 minus 7 divided by 7. We're going to times it by 100. 7 divided by 7 times 100 is 100%. So there's a 100% increase in your stock prices. Now, notice, since there is a subtraction sign in the numerator, you absolutely must, if you would like to get the question correct, put parentheses around the numerator. Otherwise, what your calculator is going to do is it'll take 7 divided by 7 and get 1 and then subtract it, because it's going to divide first and then subtract. That would give you 13 times 100, which would give you 1,300% change. That is a much better deal. However, it is a totally wrong answer. Okay, so once again, when you are doing these, make sure you put parentheses around the numerator. All right, for number 5, you bought a computer 3 years ago for $1,500. Today, it is worth $300. Describe the absolute and relative change in the computer's value. So the new value is 300. The old value is 1,500. We're going to subtract. We're going to get a negative $1,200. Okay. You can't get negatives with these. Okay. Positive means the value is increasing, and that can be good or bad depending on what you're talking about. A negative value means that it is decreasing. Also, can be good or bad, once again, depending on whatever you're measuring. In this case, we're measuring computer value, so you don't really need, it's going to decrease, hopefully not a lot, but things decrease over time, so it's a negative value. Then to find the relative change, 300 minus 1,500 divided by 1,500. Okay, this is a percent, so minus 80%. And once again, I didn't draw them, but make sure you put parentheses around the numerator. Otherwise, you would get 299. Okay, so here's kind of an example of what I mean about kind of needing both numbers. So guys, you got to check us out. We are the fastest growing religious in the country. They grew 85% over the past year. Hey Bob, want to join my religion? Sure, whatever. Well, my religion grew 100% this year. Technically, going from 1 member to 2 members is a 100% increase. The guy counters with, I have 38,000 members. Well, hope they're all good with second place. So once again, the percentage from 1 to 2 is larger. The absolute value, though, if you're dealing with 38,000 versus 1, it's a little bit different. Okay, so once again, make sure you get both numbers before you can make a call. And the boss says, don't feel bad if you only got a 3% raise. He only got 2%. Well, how can you feel bad if 2% is bigger than our 3%? Don't get mathy on me. I believe the term for getting mathy on somebody is smarter than them. It's okay. All right, we can do the same thing with percentages. Okay, absolute difference versus is the compared value minus the reference value. Okay, and you'll be told which one to compare it to. For example, the average pay of full-time wage earners varies from state to state. New York is the highest pay at $60,300. South Dakota is at $32,800. So we're going to compare the average pay in South Dakota to that of New York. So since we said we're going to compare South Dakota is going to come first and New York is going to come separate. So 32,800 minus 60,300 is negative 27,500. So the average person in South Dakota makes $27,500 less per year than an average person in New York. All right, for the relative, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do 32,800 minus 60,300 divided by 60,300 times 100. And South Dakotans make 45.6% less than people in New York. Now, the question becomes then, is it a fair comparison? Not really. If you're living in, say, New York City, which is where most people in New York live, if you wanted to get, say, a 400 or 500 square foot apartment, which would be, 30 feet by 20 feet or something like that, and you get a bath, a bed, bathroom, bedroom, and a kitchen, and that's it, you could be looking at anywhere, $1,000 to $2,000. It is not uncommon for, a somewhat what we consider here in Greenville nice 800 square foot apartment to go for, $4,000 to $5,000. So you can say, well, I can buy this in, New York for $2,000 a month. You can buy a pretty big house in parts of South Dakota for $2,000 a month. You may be looking at 1,500 to 2,000 square feet plus half acre to full acre of land. So once again, you've got to be careful with the comparisons. You'll see a lot of comparisons in wages between North Carolina and New York. Okay, it's not a very good comparison. Now, if you were to compare North Carolina to Virginia or North Carolina to South Carolina, that is a fairly good comparison. They're close by, the demographics are similar. So that would be a fair comparison to make. So make sure that whatever you're comparing actually does make sense. And also be careful, at least this one's honest, stay one night and save 0% off your stay. Here's another case. Sorry, I got to move for the sun. All right, so a study on a supplement for a cold had 712 volunteers between 12 and 80, and they said that this decreases symptoms half a day less than those taking placebo. Now, we're going to get a little bit more into medical trials later when we talk about percentages some more. But if you look at the bottom, it says 6.76 compared to 6.87. That's only 0.1. 0.1 is not half a day. Okay, so you've got to be, once again, careful for make sure you just get into the data and make sure it's working. All right, we can do the same thing with percentage points. So Jack has a savings account. They're at 2.4%. I want to know where he's getting that deal in his savings account. And they increase it to 3.2%. So if I want the absolute change, we take 3.2 minus 2.4, and that is a 0.8% percentage point increase. Okay. If I want to know what the relative terms were, 3.2 minus 2.4 divided by 2.4, don't forget parentheses, and that is a 33% increase. Okay, so once again, both data points tell the story. Okay. You've got, well, you only got a 0.8 percentage point increase. However, relatively, it's 33% increase. And when you're dealing with a savings account, I would take every percentage increase that they would give you. All right, the percentage of adults who read a print newspaper fell from 78% in 1980 to 23% in 2013. So to find the absolute, it is 23 minus 78, which is negative 55 percentage points. And if I want the relative, and I divide that by 78 with the percentages, that is a negative 70.5% decrease. So if you want to think about it, they lost 55% of the overall U.S. adult population, and then they lost 70.5% of their readers that they had. Would be kind of the two ways to look at this. Here's another one from cases in New Jersey. The article says, talking about injuries involving razors that ended up in the hospital, that researchers found that the injuries weren't only or even mostly women. In fact, only 56.7% of those presenting injuries were women. Okay. Yeah, that's a goof. Anything over 50% is mostly. All right, taxes, everybody's favorite thing. So taxes are almost always a percentage. Okay. So it's a percentage of your total cost is what you end up paying in taxes. So in this case, we have a shirt at $17. Local tax rate is 5%. There are two ways you can do this, and it doesn't matter which way you do. Whichever one you prefer, you go with it. So the first way would be to take 5% of 17, which is 85 cents, and then we add that to the $17. So $17 plus the 85 cents in tax means we would be paying $17.85. The other way you can do it is you can times it by 1 plus the percentage rate. Okay, so 1 meaning the price of the object, 100% of the object price, and then the 5% of the sales tax. So 17 times 1.05 is also $17.85. So either way works. Okay. When you're, well, let me hold off on that for just a second. All right, for part B, sales receipt shows that you paid $19.26 for a Blu-ray, including tax. There's a 7% local tax. How much did you pay for just the disc? So X is going to be our Blu-ray disc. We're going to times it by 1.07, meaning, and then that's going to equal 19.26. So we're going to divide, and it came out to exactly $18. So you paid $18 for the Blu-ray, and then you paid $1.26 in tax. Okay, so what I was going to say earlier is when you're doing these, kind of think about it initially. Is your value going to get larger or smaller? So for A, I had the tax or I had the shirt, and then I was going to add the tax. So my final answer needed to be larger than my starting value. For part B, I had tax and Blu-ray. I wanted to know just the Blu-ray, so my answer needed to be smaller. So just kind of keep that in mind before you even start. Okay, do I need a bigger answer or a smaller answer? And if your answer doesn't match what you expect, what you probably did is you multiplied instead of divided, or divided instead of multiplied. So go ahead and check that. But it's an easy way to kind of make sure, okay, what should I be expecting to see? Of course, there's, sometimes you can't do anything about it and you're just going to get bad arithmetic. So tips are also done by percentages. So this restaurant added a 15% tip for $19.43 and said it is $4.15. 18% was $4.98. 20% was $5.53. That is not exactly the case because 15% is $2.91. So, don't know if they made a mistake, an arithmetic mistake, or if they were hoping that people didn't know math and trying to get a little more tip out of them than they deserved. All right, shifting values. Be careful when you are dealing with percentages. Okay? They don't always kind of act the way you initially think they might. For example, due to losses, your employer comes to you and says, will you take a 10% pay cut and I'll give you a 10% raise in 6 months? Question, are you back to your original raise? Well, Some people go, well, 10% off, 10% added, we're fine. But if we look at this, a 10% cut, if you're making $200 a week, is $20. That bumps you down to $180. If you increase it by 10%, well, 10% of $180 is $18, and you are now at $198. You are now $2 less than where you started. Okay, because it was 10% of 200 for the first one, that was our reference, but 10% of 180 for the second one. Okay, causes problems. Sometimes you'll see numbers that represent very large percentages. That's usually okay. Okay, we saw things that were over 100%. However, things that are less than 100% usually don't work. For example, if there's an advertisement that says you would use 200% less energy by getting these energy efficient bulbs, that's telling you that the light bulbs are going to produce energy. Because at 100%, it doesn't need any energy, and at 200%, that means it's reversed the process and actually giving you energy. And as awesome as that would be, that's probably not what's happening. Okay, so usually positive percentages over 100 are okay. Negative percentages are typically not, but they can be. So just kind of keep an eye on them and make sure that whatever the situation is, it actually works. For example, they wanted to increase the deliciousness by 200%, so they put 2 bars in each pack. Well, if you went from 200% of 0 is 0. So it doesn't quite work that way. The other big one is do not average percentages. Okay. So you'll see this one a lot, especially in the news media. So we'll do a kind of an example to show you. If you did 70 questions, or got 70% of the questions right on the midterm, 90% on the final, could we say that you got 80% of all the questions correct? Well, obviously the average between 70 and 90 is 80, so we're good. But that would only happen if the test had the same number of questions. So let's say your midterm had 10 questions. That means you got 7 out of 10 correctly. Your final had 100 questions, and you got 90%, which means you got 90 out of 100 correct. Well, when we combine the two of them, that means you got 97 out of 110 questions right. That is 88.2%. Which is a much higher than the average of 80 that some people think you have. Okay, so as a general rule, never average percentages. Okay? It doesn't quite work that way. All right, sorry about the sun moving on us. Could not stop the rotation of the earth. But there you go.